Welcome to Chris Chocolaad Live. Here today with Stephen Alloy.
Hey everybody, how are you? Good to be here again, Chris. Thank you.
We're going to talk today about Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones, in particular, Beggars Banquet.
The Beggars Banquet album, an album again that I've always liked. This album, I think in a lot of ways it's an underappreciated album of the Rolling Stones. It really marked their turn into where they went over the next several years and produced some of the really the legendary albums of rock and roll. And this was the first of that group. I think a lot of people missed this one maybe.
Yeah, I mean it was awesome listening to this album this past week. I listened to it multiple times. Just got back from a road trip and I had this on listening to it. And focusing on the drums, it just makes me realize how much my determination of a band is how tight the percussion is. That new Tool album came out, and I just love it because of the percussion that's on the album. And going back and listening to the Stones and listening to this album and the percussion section, it was in particular. I was like, all right, let me focus on what Charlie Watts is doing on this album, and I was like, wow, there's things I hadn't noticed before, and what he's doing with the hi-hat and just how tight he is playing these songs. It was just like, this is why I like the music. Like I think subliminally, like I play the drums, and so I think subliminally I was like, this is why I like the music. But it was like going back and listening to it, and sort of we put your analyst hat on, and you're like, oh, what's going on in the percussion section here? It's like, wow. It's like I did like there's a lot going on, and it really just holds the whole music together. So it's kind of that was really cool.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about really talking about this album and the Stones in general in terms of Charlie Watts, because it's easy to think of Mick Jagger or Keith Richards as the Rolling Stones, but much like we in an earlier session we talked about Ray Manzarek really essentially being the sound of the Doors. I think in a lot of ways Charlie Watts really gives you the Rolling Stones sound. And provides that floor upon which they play.
Yeah, it's kind of like in comedy where if you have something crazy going on, you got to have the straight guy.
Right.
Because otherwise the craziness doesn't make sense.
You just go to crazy town.
Yeah, you just go to crazy town. You don't have the straight man, you don't, like the joke doesn't come out. You're just watching crazy. Yeah. With the straight guy, then you're like, oh, okay, now I understand. Now this is funny. And so you have the rhythm section there is it makes these guitar solos just pop as he's holding that so tight on the drums.
Oh yeah, and you think in terms of he's kind of the straight man. He's really kind of very calm and straightforward with it, but yet at the same time very skilled. I mean, you look at lifetime rankings of lifetime polls of Rolling Stone and various other rock outlets. He's way up there. He beats a lot of the people that people always think of as, oh, what a great drummer. He actually beats them in a lot of these polls. So
yeah, and I think it's from his jazz background. Now, if you're just joining us, we're going to talk about Charlie Watts, and we're going to come up with the 10 ultimate questions that we should ask Charlie Watts. And if you're on replay, welcome as well.
Yeah, and then you can't chat with us if you're on replay because we're not there anymore.
We can still leave comments. You can leave comments, and we'll read your comments.
Yeah, we'll read them, and we might.
We wish you were here now.
Yeah,
but we understand that you had more important things to do.
Yeah, you had to go to work or whatever, but
or sleep.
You're probably work and sleep. That's about all I ever do. Whether work and sleep, and then I occasionally do one of these every.
That's
3 weeks or so.
We wake up, Steve.
Other than that, that's about it.
Wake up.
Yeah, wake up. It's Charlie Watts time. Okay.
So what question do you have? Well, first of all, when did you first start listening? This album came out in 1968.
Came out in 1968. I would have been, I was pushing 12. I turned 12 that year. The album came out, I think, kind of late in the year, so I was probably almost 12. I remember this album vividly from that era and I really got introduced to it at a friend of mine, Dean Greenberg, good friend of mine as a childhood. You all know Dean, right? He.
We all, of course,
I think everybody knows Dean, right? Everybody knows a Dean. It may not be this guy, but you all know a Dean. We both played guitar, and we got together and would play guitar from time to time, and we both got really good at Jigsaw Puzzle, one of the songs on this album. and just thought it was a hilarious song, and you know, there's the 50,000 grandmas and all that. We'd laugh at that line every time. But I remember this album vividly from sitting around learning to play jigsaw puzzle on the guitar. Dean later became a yogi. I don't know if that's most of you. Of course, you know Dean, so you knew that.
Well, now I definitely know.
Later became a yogi. Yeah, so not
Greenberg, the
not
yogi.
the cartoon that
Did
Yellowstone Park
Did
thing,
he go to India and?
You know, I don't know. I think he went to it was either India or Kansas City. I can't remember which, but he went somewhere. He joined, was an ashram or became an ashman or changed his name to Asher. He did something. I don't know. I think he went somewhere. I think he did wind up going to India. I think he did, but
you don't have to go to India to be a yogi. But
yeah. Well, he started out here, started in the U.S., and then I think he did go somewhere. But he
I guess from '68, I guess there wasn't as much yoga. Like I think yoga got introduced to the U.S. through. There weren't a lot of yogis. There were some.
Yeah, I think he became like a monk. You think he probably now he's come back and he's like a tax partner with Pete Marwick or something now. But he's a
yoga monk tax partner.
He was a yogi. I don't know.
Well, let's get back. Let's get back to Charlie Watts.
Okay.
No more dating.
Charlie Watts, who was not a yogi or a tax partner that I'm aware of, but was a graphic designer. Was an artist.
Yeah,
he
so
still draws.
Because he went to art school and he was playing drums on the side, but he was making money through graphic design. Because there's that one quote. I don't remember what interview it was, but he's talking about. I just kind of expected bands to last about a week.
Right.
Most bands I was in lasted a week.
Yeah.
And
so I figured this isn't like a serious way to make money, so he worked for ad agencies. He was an artist, graphic designer for ad agencies. I mean, got paid. That's how I got paid,
So what's your question from there?
Well, my question from there is, it doesn't necessarily relate to the graphic design, but relates a little bit to the notion of bands last a week. Here he's had a 55-year career, over 55 years at the top of rock and roll, and there aren't a lot of people that have 55-year careers in rock and roll. A 5-year career in rock and roll is huge.
Yeah.
Most people have like no career in rock and roll, or if they have one, it's short. I mean, it's not much less than this. I mean, he's really had an amazing career. I mean,
do you remember like Twisted Sister?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're not going to take it. We're not going to take it. I can sing that if you want. We're not gonna take it. We're not gonna take it. Okay, right.
Like, where's Twisted Sister now? So those are like my questions. Like, when you say
they're big at my house. I know.
There's all these bands I can think like Quiet Riot and Candlebox. Like, you're right. There's these bands that come out there, and when they come out, you're like, whoa, this is an amazing new sound, and then nothing. Like Tool, right? Tool, 13 years. I mean, that was between albums. The album just came out, so it's on my brain. But I mean, they've obviously spanned it.
Well, you look. I mean, he joined the Rolling Stones in what was it, 1963, like that, thereabouts. So I mean, who was big in 1963? I mean, the Beatles were coming along. Okay, we still know about the Beatles, but they had a shorter career as a group. I mean, they all had pretty good careers individually after they broke up. But what other groups from 1963 are still around or still playing? I mean, not that many.
Right. So what's the question?
Well, the question is, really, and kind of like our last one with Ray, a lot of these are less questions than really talking points, but isn't that interesting that a guy who was with a group that could have self-destructed any time? I mean, you think about what this group did over the years. Who was, Keith Richards? I mean, come on, Brian Jones. I mean, they could have self-destructed
maybe that's the question.
Any time.
Maybe that's the question.
But they didn't.
Well,
I mean, they're still around. They're still playing.
Yeah.
Most of them are still around. Brian Jones isn't, but most of them are still around, still playing.
Because he talks about, he talks a little bit about, because people ask him, like, what do you think it's like being around for 30 years? There was an interview, I guess, at the 30-year point. And he's like, I just took it one day at a time, and all of a sudden 30 years have passed.
Yeah.
And we've been around. So maybe the question is what were those things they did as a band to stay around for 55 years? Obviously, not all dying would be one of them, but
staying alive
is good. So, like a health regimen. So, like do they do yoga? You know, is
maybe,
yoga?
maybe Dean. That's what happened to Dean. He's now the yoga trainer for the Rolling Stones. And they're a little old.
We don't need to bring Dean back in this.
Dean's a little younger than the Rolling Stones, only a little, but it's a little younger.
But what? So how do you stick? How does a band stay around for 55 years? Like, what were those? I mean, maybe that's the question to Charlie Watts. Mm-hmm. Or what were those? Like when they had hard times, like how did they how do they communicate? Like when they as a band didn't click. I remember Charlie said like he likes like on when he pre-games, he like sitting he would go to each of their different rooms and just kind of chat with some of the bandmates beforehand. Mm-hmm. And did that help them? You know, then because I could see like if there's an issue, like if two guys are having problems, and I could see like Charlie maybe coming in the room and somebody kind of like downloaded them. You know, like Bill Wyman being like, "Man, Keith is just driving me nuts with he's chewing with his mouth full again."
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I cannot take another day with him, with his, if he keeps talking with his mouth full, you know, and then maybe Charlie can diplomatically come in and talk to Keith, and it's like, hey man, you know, like you could have that conversation with him.
Well, and Keith could have pointed out that, hey, at least I'm awake, alert, and chewing.
Yeah.
That's a step ahead.
That's a step ahead.
You know, I mean, for a lot, this is a time period where they were using a lot of.
Well, and maybe that's the question then: is what was the most inane argument that you had as a band, and how did you get over it? That might be the question.
That would be fascinating.
Yeah,
because I can picture. I mean, this group over 55 years, these guys, they must have argued about some really interesting stuff.
Do you use Heinz or do you use Hunts?
Yeah.
You know, So what was the most inane argument you had, and how did you get over it? Yeah. Okay,
or the argument might be more like, no, shot between the toes or mainline, which is better? You know, that might have been more of the argument they would have had. But
at first I was thinking like, okay, now you were talking about the heroin.
I thought just substance abuse. Yes, they were substance abusers quite a bit in this era. I think now they're all kind of normal, but because they're kind of old, so it's harder when you're older because you tend to
I thought you were talking about just going when you went into the doctor's office. Like I never had them ask me that question. That's always been.
No, they kind of choose for you.
They always go mainline, so I never had the option of going anywhere else. Well, that's question one. I think. What's the most inane argument you had as a group, and how did you guys resolve it?
Yeah. So now we're up to question 2. So question 2. I went old school on.
Question. I think it's my turn.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Because you had the 55-year.
That was sort of my so that was my question, even though that was actually your question. But okay, I'll take.
No, that was. Right. I think we both came up with the question. We started off with the 55-year thing.
55-year argument. And then I'll take it. If that
you can if you want to go to the next one.
No, if that ticks a question off of my list, I'm good with that. So we're good. Okay, fine. Yeah, go. Okay, yeah, that was mine. Right? Yeah. Dude.
Did you lose your question?
I did, but
you got a backup?
I always take a backup. I'll be right back.
He's in an interview, and
it's like a 10-foot drop here. You can't see that on camera, but it disappeared. It went away. I better hang on to this one.
There's just that interview where he's sitting in the interview and he's holding his hands like this. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember who's doing the interview, and the interviewer is like commenting, and it's like, Charlie, I notice you're sitting on your hands. What's up with that?
Yeah.
Which is that's very like all the questions I asked Charlie like I guess that's a good question. Mm-hmm. So Charlie's like, look, when I interview, I'm just hyper. He says that my arms are always moving, and if my arms are always moving, I start touching my face, and then when I get home, my wife says, "You touching your face?
Yeah, you're touching your face on TV.
TV too much. Please stop. Please stop doing that."
And in a way that makes sense. I mean, he's a drummer, so he said, a drummer is always used to doing something with my hands, and graphic artist used to doing something. So he's kind of motion oriented, I guess. So yeah, he would literally sit in interviews. He'd sit on his hands, or he'd put his hands in his armpit, or he just literally just to hold them in place.
So he's not moving around all the time. Mm-hmm. I could see, like, as a kid, was he sitting in church with the family, and then like mom or dad is like tapping him on the back of the head because he's like shaking the whole pew.
Oh, yeah, he was going like
that he's shaking the pew as a
It
kid.
was hitting the rhythm, and I don't know if that came through, but he's hitting rhythm on the pews.
But I can also see where that becomes it's kind of like a superpower where there's the balance between if you're always moving like that, then you're always like in some way your body might be thinking about rhythms.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So does that end up being kind of a superpower where he's like you start playing out rhythms because when you're talking you're like, oh, that sounds good. Yeah. So my question is there other things, are there other habits you have that sometimes are like, what other habits do you have that have helped you be as a drummer? Where at first people thought, hey, moving your hands all the time and touching your face on an interview doesn't work, but when you're doing your main gig, it works so well. Is there other habits? What are those other habits that make you a highly successful drummer?
Yeah, and being percussion, maybe it's something like blowing my nose. Hey, I blow my nose.
I wouldn't have gone there, like.
Well, percussion, like I think of that.
I was like thinking, like maybe it's just like practicing a lot.
Well, I'm sure he practiced quite a bit. Maybe he blew his
habits.
nose like in like maybe a hi hat on the nose blow. Maybe I don't know. What would that be? A hi hat on the nose blow? I'm not even sure.
I don't even know how you get nose blow.
It'd be as you hold the Kleenex up, or you use metallic Kleenex. I think that's what you do, or Kleenex with the little snare things on them.
I'm getting insights into your like internal brain that somewhat frighten me right now. But that's.
Oh yeah, so look inside the brain is always a frightening thing. Yes.
Which would bring. Let's go to question.
Go to question 3.
So that's question 2. This is question 3.
Okay, question 3 on. And that is actually Jigsaw Puzzle that's playing in the background right now, and this question relates to that song. One of the
we
lyrics
practiced that. We practiced so the timing that Jigsaw Puzzle would start exactly on question 3.
Because we have such good rhythm. We're so good.
And remember, we're coming up with the 10 ultimate questions.
Right.
So if you scroll through fast on YouTube and you're not at this point, we're coming up with the 10 ultimate questions to ask Charlie Watts, and Rolling Stones. We're focused on Beggars Banquet.
Right. One of the verses in this song says something about each of the band members. It says, the singer's angry at being thrown to the lions. The bass player is nervous about the girls outside. And some of these, I think, were kind of, accurate or sardonic comments on the real people involved. I think Mick Jagger did get angry about being kind of out front when things went wrong. Supposedly, Bill Wyman, the bassist, if what I've read is true, was extremely interested in groupies. Maybe a lot of he wasn't the only one, but he had an unusually strong interest in them. So, the one for Charlie is the drummer. He's so shattered, trying to keep up time. And that's interesting. I mean, of all the people I can imagine being shattered, and of course that's the title of a great Rolling Stones song from a few years, about 10 years after this. But of all the people I can imagine being shattered, he's not on the list. It's hard to picture Charlie Watts shattered. What would that look like?
Well, maybe it's just him getting frustrated. Like he's marching, he's keeping time, and then when he doesn't hear the other group members like keeping time with him, does he like grab a drumstick and like what? Yeah, so like.
Well, you wonder. I mean, he might, because he was very conscious of being part of a group and saw it as a sort of a team. I think so. He may have been one who like whipped the softball to somebody if they weren't paying attention. Maybe
the softball,
or so to speak.
Yeah,
that's not a euphemism. I was talking about like an actual softball, but it could be a euphemism. I don't know.
So the question is like what would get? How did Charlie get shot? Like what?
Yeah, well, I guess it's a 2-part question. Is that lyric, supposed to represent?
Because you're not
them?
getting out of this. You have to make it a question. This is like.
Oh, this is hard.
This is Jeopardy. This is like Jeopardy. You have to make this a question.
You are shattered. No, okay, that's a question right now. So I guess making it a question, were those lyrics about the band members, were they meant to reflect the real Rolling Stones, or was it, just random? I tend to think it was probably representing the real Rolling Stones. And then the second part of that is what happened when you, Charlie, what happened when you got shattered? I mean, what did that look like? What did you do?
What does it look like when Charlie, when he's ruffled?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then how does, so what were those times he got ruffled? And then like going back to their first question.
And what ruffled you? See, this is really, I should get credit for like 4 questions for this.
What I mean, like how did they get over it? So if you, like, I get the sense that he was a lot of times the argument settler, or he helped.
Yeah, probably was.
It sounded like that. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but it sounded like he was somewhat of he kept the whole team, the group grounded. Mm-hmm. What happened when Charlie got ungrounded?
Yeah,
it's and then how did the team?
It's like when the mediator starts yelling at people, when the negotiator, this like mediating between two sides, when he starts yelling at people, what do you do then?
This is
like pretty bad. Like, what's happening here?
This is like when the normal calm mom all of a sudden is like mom just took a steak knife and threw it. You know, like.
Well, see, I think most people can imagine their mom throwing a knife at them. It's like, oh.
Did I say like mom?
Did I say too much about
that
my
moment?
Own life? No, I'm sorry.
That moment when mom, like the normal normally when mom is like all calm, and then all of a sudden you're like you see your mom in a fit of rage, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, first time you see one of your your nice guy parents,
your
first
dad,
time you see one of them mad, it's like,
like really mad.
What's up with that?
Not like fake pretend.
Mm-hmm.
Just mad. Like you've done something that's really bad. Mm-hmm. And that seems like, is that what Charlie Watts' role was? Like, did he ever have that moment when he? So like, I guess we asked that question. What's that most nuanced thing? Mm-hmm. Like, what was that thing that shattered him? Like, what would he get upset about?
Yeah, what could shatter Charlie Watts? I mean, he's a rock and roll drummer playing arenas with, Keith Richards. Okay, what could possibly upset this guy?
Yeah, what would it set?
And he could handle that pretty calmly. Okay, it's gonna. What would it take to upset this guy? I mean, okay, really? I mean, it'd be
like you show up late to practice. Is that what flips?
Wow.
Charlie Watts.
I mean, you seem to. I mean, it's not. I don't imagine. I mean, I've never been a rock drummer for a 55-year successful group, or for any group for that matter. But I got to think there are so many things in that life that just would be upsetting. And playing in front of thousands of people. Mics go out,
amps are going to drop.
Yeah, I mean, stuff goes wrong all the time. People are yelling, people are storming the stage, or throwing things, or whatever.
And he was very well dressed.
And he wear nice suits and just stay calm the whole time.
You know what?
Wow, geez, really? How do you do that? I mean, that's hard.
I hope this is. I don't think this is. Remember, there's the anecdote of him punching Mick Jagger in the face.
Really? I don't think I saw that.
You read that? So
that would be interesting.
So maybe that. So
that sounds like Shattered. Okay.
So he's sleeping in his hotel room, and Mick Jagger picks up the hotel phone. I guess wakes him up. Is the way I understand the story, and is like, "Is this my?" And Jagger's, I guess, he says, "Is this my drummer?" And so the story goes that Watts gets up, puts on a suit, he puts on the full Windsor knot.
Yeah.
Goes upstairs, knocks on the door. When I guess when Mick Jagger answers the door, he's like, "I'm not your drummer. You're my singer," and then punches him in the face.
And, that's kind of cool. That's a good story. I like that.
And so that kind of like as you were talking about, like, is that the thing that is like one? There are teammates, and and so if one team, not referring to themselves as a team, was that what shattered him, or is the fact that he was sleeping and somebody woke him up to give him this stupid, like,
or like, you woke me up to offend my sense of sportsmanship here.
Yes.
You know,
And
so you got like two things going that I don't like.
And so there's the combination of
yeah,
those
combination
two
of
things.
those two is like, oh please.
Then
I'm gonna punch you, dude, for that.
Yeah, and so I think that's a great question. Like, what does it take to shatter Charlie Watts? And what was
apparently that's what it took.
But of that, what was it really that
what was the
bothered him?
Yeah.
You know, what was that? You know, what was that thing of that incident that really torqued him off?
Well, and he really did see it as part of a group and a team, and people would talk about, yes, you're a great drummer, you rank, you know, number 10 lifetime for among all drummers. That was part of the Rolling Stones. I mean, we were a group.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
I think. Let me go to question. I think we're on question 4. So I think I got the even ones because you started. But let's go.
But there were like a bunch of questions. We should be.
No, but that's the Socratic method. Like we ask questions to get because we're trying to get at the ultimate
like
question.
Question 9 or so by now.
No, we're trying to get only the ultimate questions count.
Okay.
Only the ultimate questions count. Like so, if we take a couple questions to get there, those don't count. It's that final question. That's the one we're looking for. So we're at the 4th ultimate.
Great song in the background here. The Prodigal Son, I think wildly underappreciated song. I think it's interesting. I saw something, not to interrupt the question here, but I saw a ranking of that was done over time. There was like a rating or something of the songs on this album. There was a 1968 when it came out, and then there was another one I don't know, in the 90s or something, and then there was a more recent one like last year. And this song didn't score too well in the early one. But now it's like one of the best liked songs on the album. And the song really has gotten, I think, more appreciated with time. I think hopefully this album will get more appreciated with time. Of course, it's already been out 50 years, so
yeah. So the next 50 years will be.
Next 50 years really gonna be great.
It'll be like Mozart. It'll be remembering him. But we were talking. I guess on the Mozart reference. So they asked Charlie, there's this interview he's doing, and it gets into this, what about the London sound is it that America likes? And Charlie's visibly agitated now at the interviewer. And I love
shattered, one could even say.
I wouldn't say shattered at this point.
He's semi-shattered.
Yeah, he's Britishly annoyed. I think
he's shat.
Yeah, he's shat. Yeah, he's shat. He's Britishly annoyed because the interview's asking this question, and for him it's obvious that they're not playing London music. They're playing American music back to America.
Yeah.
And so
it came from over here.
And he has to explain it. He has to say, look, was it Red Rooster?
Yeah, Red Rooster.
Yeah, Red Rooster. He goes,
Willie Dixon.
I
mean, come on.
Yeah, there was Red Rooster, and then what was the other one?
But if it was, the real artists, the black artists, well, yeah, no, they're not going to play that.
And so he's visibly annoyed, and he's like, why can I see this, and you, the music expert / critic, not
from the country that this music came
from, asking me this question,
and you don't even know that this is yours.
But
your music.
The interviewer has to know this, right? Like he has to know this question, but it's not. Right? It is not. It's like the obvious thing in the room. There's obviously this giant elephant in the room that everyone's ignoring but not talking about. And I think my question related to that is, what was there a blues song that you wished you had played, or that was on this album that isn't? So like Jumpin' Jack, we talked earlier about like Jumpin' Jack Flash got recorded the same time this album was recorded. Yeah. Gets released as a single, and that seems like it makes all the sense in the world because it goes in retrospect, it goes number 1. Jumpin' Jack Flash. Because maybe I'm wondering if there was a song that was out there, but it's like, oh guys, that's gonna take it too far. We just can't. The audience isn't gonna dig it. Like with 1968, was there a song in 1968 that in 1968 Charlie Watts was like listening to, and it's like, man, this song has just got so amazing. It's got so much depth to it. It's got so many so fun to play that you wish that you're advocating for? You might have said, "Hey, this is the blues song I want to put on here," and for whatever reason didn't make it.
Yeah, well, it's in it because Charlie Watts, before his Rolling Stones life, and maybe even when he's not playing, maybe even still, huge jazz fan. I mean, really liked jazz far more than rock, blues, jazz and blues.
Well, I don't know if he likes it. He definitely, I think it gives him something. Well, I guess you have to ask him that question. But it's like, does he like it more? Maybe that's the ultimate question between blues. But it seems like there's things you can get from jazz that that he wasn't getting from the Stones, and it like there's a compliment there that that pops up.
Yeah, well, in rock in general, in one of the interviews that I looked at, he mentioned that he really had never listened to Elvis Presley, and so Jagger and Richards said, well, you really you ought to find out what's going on. It's 1963. He said, yeah, you ought to listen to a little Elvis Presley.
You need to understand what rock and roll is.
Right? Yeah,
if you're gonna play in a rock band,
play rock and roll. He listened to it. He said, who likes this stuff? This is horrible. I never liked Elvis Presley. Okay, well, maybe you don't like it, but this is what's going on. Really, Elvis Presley was kind of, in a way, kind of doing the same thing they were doing. He was taking, black songs to a large extent and, getting them played on, mainstream radio stations because it was from him and not from the original artist. Hound Dog stands out as prime example, but there were others.
Well, I think that leads us to the next question. It's an odd question. I think we're on question 5, so that gives it to you.
So that'd be back to me, huh? Well, another question that I've got. I'll ask this now because I have one about opening riffs. I want to ask that later. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss that question. But this one, kind of a throwaway question in a way. But who were you in the band? Who were you the closest with in the band? I got a theory that maybe it was Bill Wyman, bass player, but I don't know.
Maybe artistically.
It'd be a good question. Certainly artistically, I think he was closest to Bill Wyman.
Because that gets into, that's a good question. But is it like, does that get back to that team question where, we're all a team, we're all close with each other, and then does that become like a team dynamic where if you're seeing your friends, you end up playing off each other?
Yeah, you wonder, or if there were
factions.
I mean, I don't think I don't know. I don't know. I guess this would be part of this question too. I don't know that he hung out with the other guys socially when they weren't working. Did you? If you did, who? I mean, I don't know. It'd be a good question.
You mean well, yeah, I guess that pops up a little bit, and there was that interview question, and this is one where he gets visibly annoyed at the interviewer, where because he has this big band, there's the Charlie Watts big band,
yeah,
Charlie Watts quintet and Charlie Watts tentet is that or pentet?
Which he actually was doing that right around the same time, the late '60s is I think when he started that, didn't he?
Yeah, well, these were probably a little bit. I guess maybe 660 a little bit later. Because this gets big, and then he now has enough money to actually fund the band.
Yeah. After this, and then Exile on Main Street, he made some money. Yeah. Yeah, they did okay. Those Stones guys,
they made enough money.
They made a couple of dollars, I think, off this. Yeah,
off the money. But he's visibly annoyed, when they're asking him the question about. You're not dedicated to the Stones because you're in your free time, you're off with the Charlie Watts big band. And, by the way, you collect things and you have all these other hobbies outside of being a Stone. You're not as dedicated to being a Rolling Stone as the other Rolling Stones, who the only stories we hear about are them doing things about the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And so I kind of get what your question, so the question is, he had... But his response back was these other people do things besides...
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of a rude question. It's like saying, you sleep so you're not really dedicated to your job. It's like, no, I think everybody sleeps. I mean...
I happen to have these
other
hobbies.
At some point. Yeah, I mean, come on.
But it's your question, how did they hang out? Well, were there other hobbies they bonded over?
Yeah.
Obviously, he dressed well. He had this jazz influence. So were there other hobbies that they went out and did together? And I think that gets back to your first question, like how do they stick around for 55 years?
Right.
Is it because they took
Yeah.
time apart, and then when they came together, they did stuff they loved together, and then they had this time apart, and that dynamic helped?
Maybe.
Or did they actually like when they have forced fun at the office? It's like, all right, today guys,
Yeah, today's fun day.
we're all going bowling together.
Yeah. Right.
Did you guys have like forced fun days with the Stones? You know what I mean, it's
like a corporate retreat with the Stones.
The
where
Stones.
They got to go like levitate each other.
like before they show up at the studio. It's like, all right, guys,
Yeah.
we're going to axe throwing today.
Okay, Charlie, I want you to sit with Mick, and I want you to say 5 things that you like about him, and then 5 things that he could do better.
Yes. So they have like the five.
And Mick, I want you to say 5
There's a
things
big
about Charlie.
whiteboard,
Okay.
and they're walking up with sticky notes and putting
Yeah.
it on there. Okay,
Yeah.
it's brainstorming time.
And we're going to leave this up here the whole weekend, so you can come in anytime and look at it, because we know middle of the night you're going to want to come in and see what we wrote here.
And that's how you came up with the Beggars Banquet. Like they're sitting there in this at the corporate retreat. And it's like, okay, guys, we need a new producer. All right, everyone. They didn't have sticky notes, so what do? They what do you do before the sticky note? You can't have a brainstorming session without sticky notes. They didn't have whiteboards either.
Well, they use like Scotch tape. They tape stuff up to the wall, and you can imagine it's okay for let's think of 5 ways that are outside the box for making music. Oh gosh,
They probably didn't think about the saying outside the box.
we could take our shoes and pound them against the wall. Ooh, there's one. Oh, it's outside the box. Ooh, we like that. Yes, keep thinking. I'm just picturing a Stones corporate retreat.
What does a Rolling Stones corporate treat look like? That is a very good question. Like how do they? Yeah. So what did that look like?
That counts as my question?
I don't think I think that's kind of part of your question that ends up being.
Okay.
What was the actual question? Your question was about.
It was about who were you closest to in the band.
Who were you closest to the band? But I think that leads into like what did you guys do together, and then
and did you bond at the corporate retreat?
At the bond
at the Rolling Stones corporate
because that's what that kind of
implies.
implies. It's like you got like there's just people you get along with in the band and people you don't get along with in the band. So you have to have they have to bring in someone to get the band. It's like all right. All right. Now everyone doesn't like Mick Jagger, but okay. What can we do?
I guess there would be a corollary to that question. It doesn't strike me that there was anybody he really didn't get along with.
Right?
Was there somebody he didn't get along with?
And after the corporate retreat, that's how they got to the 55-year point. They were like, okay, it's all been resolved.
And they did this retreat when Brian Jones was still here. Jones came up with this horrible idea. It's like, no, I'm just not going to hang with
We don't
him.
call ideas horrible. Every idea
has merit.
Is
oh,
merit.
That's all good. But his was, hey, let's do a bunch of drugs and go swimming. Bad idea, Brian.
Again, no bad ideas.
No bad
That's
ideas.
a great idea, Brian. That is a great idea. Anyone want to build off that idea?
Not too well for you, but great idea.
No. You're. Yeah, I totally see. But that's where I think it's a good. Your question is excellent, but it leads you into like.
Hey, you're just saying that because this is our corporate retreat, right?
Is that what our corporate? That's right. That's an excellent.
It's like the Baby Shark Beard corporate retreat that we're doing right now.
But
so great idea, Steve.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Steve.
No, you don't think it's a great idea.
How do we? What can we add on to that to make it even better?
I know we could take our shoes and we could pound on the wall.
Then it's.
Now
we actually have a question. Yes, that's good. So that probably leads us into question 6. See, I
keep track here.
We're at question 6. So I still got the evens, you got the odds.
Yeah. And the odds are I'm not gonna come up with enough, but we'll get creative.
We've been talking a lot about how long this band's been out there, which is it was on that note. There's that when they ask him, this is like the 30-year point. It's like, did you think you'd be in the Stones for 30 years? He's like, I didn't think I'd be in the band for more than a week.
Yeah.
It's like, look,
so most bands last a week, so yeah.
And it's just sort of his answer is like, I take it day by day. So individually, it doesn't seem that long because every day you look and you're like, yeah, the Stones is still around. But when you look in the past, you're like, wow, we've been doing this for 30 years, which seems like when you look forward, 30 years seems so far. But looking back, it goes quick. I think that's kind of the gist of what he was. What he was getting at. He's in it. He's also he's been married to Shirley. Is it Shirley Ann Shepherd? He met her before the Stones gets really huge, and that might be what's helped. I mean, maybe that's part of the secret to them staying together.
Well, yeah, I mean they've been married 55 years, essentially 54 or something like that. Yeah. But basically this whole time.
So my question is, in 1968, if you ask Shirley, like what does Charlie think Shirley would say about him?
Yeah, she might say that he fidgets too much. He touches his face on TV.
Yeah,
she did say that apparently.
And does she think
your face on TV?
And does she think, like, as this Beggars Banquet comes out and she's watching this all go down, is she like stick with this, or
well,
Charlie, you've made a mistake?
Well, no. When this came out, she probably said, "Well, it's a whole lot better than that Satanic Majesty's Request you put out last year. You're really on the right track now."
So
finally. Please don't do that again. Don't stick with this.
So she might be the secret sauce of the Stones. No one's actually thought of. It's like, okay, because she's given her unbiased opinion. She's got nothing.
Just sort of the non-singing Yoko, maybe.
Yeah, oh man, that's a tough one.
And I know
for me.
people wish Yoko was the non-singing Yoko too. I know that.
Yeah, that's if you bring in once you bring in Yoko, she did that orgasm.
Well, I don't know about her private life.
No, she has a song called Orgasm.
Oh, okay.
And it's just so horrifically, it just bothers me listening to that song, so I have. When you say Yoko, I immediately associate it with this song called Orgasm, and I can't deal with.
Well, I got to tell you, many years ago, I lived in New York for a brief period of time, and I was at a coffee shop outdoors somewhere. I can't remember exactly where. And I'm sitting there drinking espresso or something, and walking right around the corner, right toward me, is Yoko Ono and her bodyguard. And we locked eyes. And I recognized her. I don't think she recognized me, however. But I went, and she kind of waved. So Yoko and I don't think she had an orgasm, but I think we did have that little moment there, and I thought it was kind of cool. I don't know, Finished my espresso and left, and that was it. But
that's a cool Yoko
story.
That's better than
it's like, well, it's just hi,
That song just brings back traumatic. Like just hearing that song, I don't like it, and so I associate it with her, and so I'm sure she's a very nice woman. It's just that song in particular. But like for Shirley Ann, was there something that, like, because she would have been, I mean, especially by not being a groupie and having somewhat of an objective viewpoint, that would be invaluable to have.
It's something that a lot of rock stars have not had and maybe could have used.
Effectively, just
a non-groupie objective viewpoint.
A non-yes person, someone you're not paying, is not afraid to be fired. It's not like that's going to give you some objective, or give you a viewpoint that's not getting shaped necessarily by whether or not you're paying them or not.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So is that? I think So my question may have evolved into how important a role was Shirley in the Stones, and that you guys have been married for 55 years. You as a bedrock, but how? My original question is, what would she say about Charlie Watts out in '68?
Yeah.
But maybe it's also linked to that is how did she influence in 1968? How did she help influence what the band was doing, or is it?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, she has had a huge influence on him. I mean, 55 years together. I mean, that's has a huge influence on him. But in some of the other groups we've looked at, we kind of knew the influence with Jim Morrison, with Ray Manzarek. We kind of knew the influence, and they both had. Ray really was with the same woman for about 50 years as well, so he kind of a similar situation.
But isn't it talked about?
Shirley, we really don't know. And she's very well, and Charlie is kind of quieter than certainly Ray or certainly Jim Morrison. So I'm gonna guess maybe she's quieter too, and we just kind of don't know what her influence. But it might have been a pretty significant influence.
And those kind of things, those always intrigue me. Is sort of like what's going on behind the scenes. Like you often see in a band you got to have the front person. You have the Angus Young of AC/DC. You have this person that's put out front, and that gets marketed a lot. And there's things going on behind the scenes. We've been talking about that in a couple of our podcasts of like Ray Manzarek and Charlie Watts here on drumming. They're doing this incredible role behind the scenes. But that brings up those other people that may have been absolutely pivotal
or pitiable. One of the
pitiable. Some of that's
absolutely pitiable.
Yes, but it's just
which is important. It's important to have somebody that's pitiable.
Yeah, somebody you can feel sorry for. That makes you feel better. That's always very important for any
I'm not doing so bad. Look at that.
Look at that. Look at that poor slob. He's an addict and he's going to die soon.
Yeah,
now we all feel better. But who are those people behind the scenes that are so critical to the band that sometimes don't get talked about? And so was she end up being one of those people that they some of the series about the royalty on TV, and they try to sometimes they dig into some they make up characters that are like that.
Yeah,
and maybe Shirley is one of those. And so maybe that's the question: is how pivotal of a role you guys been together the entire time. The Stones have been together.
It's a long time. It's a lot of years.
Yeah. How important has she been to the?
And of course, we know. Everybody knows Jagger, Richards. They're obviously more public influence, but
there's more Google searches going on.
There's always something more going on behind the scenes. So was she part of that? So thinking about Ray Manzarek for just a moment, we were talking in the
keyboards
Doors.
From the Doors.
Yeah, keyboards from the Doors.
You all know that. I was just for.
Because we did you all watch all our sessions, right? We did a session on that a few weeks ago. You saw that, didn't you? Okay, but anyway, we were talking about this just right before we got on. It's like, wouldn't it have been interesting? Because the Stones had an unofficial keyboarder, Ian Stewart or something. I forget. I think it was Ian Stewart, but played keyboard on a lot of their albums. Was never an official member of the Rolling Stones, but recorded with them quite a bit. Actually toured with them too. We were talking, wouldn't it have been interesting after Jim Morrison died, rather than keeping the Doors going, what if Ray Manzarek had become keyboardist for the Rolling Stones?
Oh, right. Yeah, and now you got that massive creative.
Would have been a very different Rolling Stones, maybe, but I don't know. It could have been fun.
Or just a jam session.
He would have joined them right after Exile on Main Street.
I suppose it's a good question to throw out there. Was there a jam session when Manzarek was playing with some of the guys from the Stones?
Did he ever play with them? Yeah.
Keith Richards. I'm
sure. Not that I know of, but could be. Right?
Yeah, maybe like a special Farm Aid or something.
Yeah, they might have played together somewhere.
But I think this leads us into
to the next question, huh?
Question 7.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Question 7. Magic 7.
No, I think it's question 11. Wait, 9.
Or it's question 7.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate questions. There were the other questions, but we're at question 7.
Okay. All right. So 7. Oh, so I have the odds, right? Okay. Well, and again, this might be more of a. Well, this is. I will make this into a question following the rules of the.
You can just start. We can dig in and
rules
find
of the corporate
question.
retreat are it has to be a question. And
it has to be.
I can only
because
ask
it's the 10 ultimate questions. We don't want to lie to our audience.
If I have the question stick, right? I have the question stick. I've got the question stick, I guess. Okay. So one of the things that when I think of the Rolling Stones, something that really jumps out at me is a lot of their songs, almost all their hits, and a lot of their album songs have these marvelous opening riffs. Typically guitar riffs. I tend to always to associate them with Keith Richards because they're generally guitar riffs. But think about Jumpin' Jack Flash. Think about Brown Sugar. Think about name your Rolling Stones. Satisfaction. I mean, think about any of those, and certainly the later songs as well. My personal favorite probably is Rocks Off from the lead off, the opening song on Exile on Main Street. It's a riff that I was telling you earlier, I probably hum that to myself at least once a day. na 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 da 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 da. Anyway,
So,
so now you'll be humming it too. But question, I'm going to make this. I still have the question stick, right? And or the question shtick, maybe one could say. But these were largely guitar riffs. Occasionally a bass is in there, like Satisfaction, I'm thinking. But what role did Charlie Watts, did the drums have in those riffs? Because some of them, for an example, in Rock Song, very prominent drums. In Street Fighting Man on this album, another great opening riff, drums very prominent in that as well. Did you guys work on that consciously? Was that a goal that, like, hey, we're going to create an opening riff that's going to bring people into the song, or is that kind of how it happened? Or did you write the song and your producer said, we need an opening riff, and so then you wrote one? I mean, how did those come about? Because for me, it's a signature Rolling Stones thing.
I'm thinking, like, is he at the grocery store? And sometimes the grocery store, with the grocery cart makes a little dun 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 dun. Like when the wheels go and it hits, because it's like have a tingy sound, and so it sounds like dun 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 dun.
I know that song,
right? And then so you grab the milk and then you're over to the eggs and it's like dun 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 dun.
So you're thinking milk, James Milk.
Yes, and then you grab, but it sounds like that. And so it's like when I'm listening, so is that as the wheel kind of like bounces, it goes bum ba dum bum 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 bum. And then when there's this new thing called Odie Milk, and then Odie Milk has its own song too, where it's Odie Milk, everybody has Odie Milk, ba dum bum bum. And so maybe the riffs on this.
I think Keith Richards wrote that.
Odie Milk. The Odie Milk riff. So what if, like, he's at the grocery store and, like, in Britain they don't have like the big carts, maybe they're just like, but he's like,
the little prams.
The little prams where they got the little basket
wagons.
It's been a while since it's been, but a lot of times they buy their groceries every day. Is kind of what I read. My vision of Europeans is they buy small amounts of groceries every day. Yeah. So maybe like they're putting the apple in the bag or something, and it makes a cool sound like whoosh, and then all of a sudden the whoosh.
Or it's a handheld basket, and it just makes the sound when it goes in. It's like, and that's where he gets like the snare, or the hi-hat. It goes. He's like, oh, yeah. Drops a metal tin of coffee, for example, and it goes.
Yeah. So the question maybe is does it expand into? You're asking, like, how did Charlie Watts develop these riffs?
Yeah, how did those riffs work?
Was it because like somebody telling him, or is he just inspired all the time? Just like, is that part of his like, I'm touching my face right now, right? Yeah. I'm touching my face. Is he just out there?
Touching his face is like,
right? But is that part of it? Like, he's just out in life and like he's hearing the natural rhythms of life, and that becomes a I guess it puts in his bank. He's like, and so he's like in there with Keith, and Keith comes up with something, or there's some sound, and he's like, oh.
Yeah, he starts fidgeting with his fingers, and Keith writes some notes to it. Like, writes, there's a melody that would go with that. And there's your riff. I was out the other night with Shirley, and we heard a woodpecker. This is the woodpecker riff. It was like, that's his internal name for it. It's like, we need to put some pecker on this one. And he grabs the pecker riff, and he starts putting the pecker on it. It's like, and he goes, and he put a pecker on it. I don't know if we can say that. Can we say
woodpecker? That? We're talking woodpeckers.
Oh, okay. I don't know if we can say that on.
We're talking woodpeckers. You're allowed to talk. You're allowed to talk about woodpeckers.
Well, it's labeled. The YouTube will be labeled now.
No.
They talk about peckers on here. We can't.
There's no, like, if you're talking, it's purely context. Pecker in terms of woodpecker. There's no. It's not derogatory.
Native North American bird.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. No, it's legit. That's fine. I think we're good.
So the ultimate. So how did the riffs come about? Is the gist of the question.
That is the question.
But I think there's some
question stick now too.
But I think there's some sub parts to that. It's like,
there are.
How did the inspiration? What was his inspiration process? Like, if he was involved in the riffs, what's his inspiration process? Was it the peckers that he hears outside? Was it the grocery store sounds? Was it, was there, what is Charlie Watts' inspiration?
Did the peckers inspire him? Is what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. See, we're gonna get tagged for this.
We're not. They're birds.
Okay.
You're
They're
birds.
birds, right? Okay.
It's like the yellow-titted swallow. That it's a bird. You don't have, like, just because it has a word you associate with something else, it is still.
So you've got peckers and swallow in the same sentence. This is going to be a problem.
It's not your mind sometimes is a scary place. Okay, we're going to the next question. Question
Okay.
8.
Yeah, which is you get the evens, right?
Yes. Question 8. See, what was as we talked about? There's a clip on the internet of Keith Richards shooting the bird at Charlie Watts. This probably wasn't in 1968.
Pecker.
No.
It's a bird, right?
You're obsessed. You're obsessed with the pecker.
No, it's a bird, right? We're talking the bird.
He's shooting his finger. He turns around and uses an obscene gesture in some places at Charlie, and the backstory, or what's listed as the backstory, is Charlie Watts makes a mistake, or maybe it's Charlie Watts screwing a bit with Keith Richards, and then Keith Richards.
Here you go, and you're going to say it's my mind. Okay, we're talking bird, pecker, screwing. All right. Work with me, folks. This is a problem, right?
It's not. You can turn anything into an innuendo. Anything can be turned into any window. Anything at all.
All right. Well, just say something. We'll see.
Like Keith Richards. I mean, you can come
Oh,
up with.
there you go, dude. That's a problem. See, there you go. That's
right.
a problem.
That can become immediately make that. We're Keith Richardson. We're back there slapping the Keith Richards.
Mm-hmm.
We're out there banging out Keith Richards. We were out there yanking some Keith Richard. I was back there and I was wet as Keith Richard.
He's really taken a turn that I didn't expect.
But you see, anything can be turned into. So you just have to get it out of your mind. It's like,
okay.
When you hear Keith Richard.
Anyway, Keith Richards is giving the finger.
Yes, he is giving the finger to Charlie Watts. And it's at the end of a song, and so it's sort of it seemed like it was the contest was someone messed up, or someone they were messing around with each other, and so it was sort of this group moment where he's like, you messed with me, but I caught you. But what that made me think of is, did Charlie Watts, if some band member was maybe not being, you're playing a lot of concerts, and I can see there's Jimi Hendrix had this quote, or in an interview mentions that, man, keeping the audience interested is one part of my job, but I can keep myself interested. And sometimes when you hear me playing and doing stuff, that's because I find it interesting, because I'm playing these songs a lot, and I change things up sometimes just so I stay
awake.
Stay
focused.
And then I put on a better concert for the folks that are listening by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And my question for Charlie Watts was, because you mentioned that he focuses on this team. We ask him, everything is team focused. If he feels like the band is losing focus, like he's listening to the song, and he's like, oh, so and so's not, something just doesn't sound quite right. Did he do something? Was he kind of like the center on the team, like a basketball reference? Was he like the center, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna mess with Keith right now just because Keith, like he knows, all right, Keith just got a scratch on his favorite car, and that's probably what he's thinking about. I've got to get him out. I gotta get that out of his head. Something's happened. Something. Keith is obsessed about something. He's thinking about it. He's not in the zone. Was there anything Charlie would do when he's playing live to help get the other bandmates back focused in when he felt something wasn't jiving right?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, and I think a lot of groups had somebody like that. A lot of teams do. Usually it's the coach, but not always.
When you're out in the field, you have the coach back there, but sometimes when you're out in the field, you know something about the player that the coach, in this case, the producer, may not know. If they were at the corporate retreat, they now know a lot about each other. Well, and it's like, oh, so-and-so's thinking about this.
Well, did he have the thinking stick? I don't think he did.
Right, and so
he can't think.
And so maybe the bird was sort of the thinking
stick. The other guy, he's got, Keith Richards has the thinking stick, so
maybe
Keith
was
is
just
the one that's thinking.
yes, and so maybe he was just passing the thinking stick. It was like shooting him. The bird was like passing the thinking stick back to him.
He can pass you the thinking stick, but I think Keith has fallen asleep, so I don't think he's going to pass you, and you can't take it. Because that'd be rude, right? That'd be wrong. Right?
It has to be passed.
It has to be passed.
And so what were some of those group dynamics that happened live on stage? Nothing like that may have happened, but I'm just kind of curious, after reading about that incident, was there things that Charlie Watts would do to kind of bring that group back and get them focused?
Yeah.
So that was my question. That's
well,
my question.
And it's a good question, and that in a way, believe it or not, actually leads into question. Which one is this?
It's got to be it. No, I have the odds. You get the even.
Oh.
So you got to be in question 8.
Okay, good. That means we're hitting there. Question 8 is again sort of a talking point, but we'll turn it into a question with the question stick. Oh wait, we don't have a question stick. We do have a question stick. Anyway, we talked about Charlie being kind of even-tempered, even keel, very calm, quiet, shy, one would even say in a lot of cases. Yet he's not only a rock drummer, which most people wouldn't associate with small actions. Usually those are big actions here. And he's a rock drummer for the Rolling Stones at a time when a lot of other rock groups at that time that were playing at the same time this album was coming out, and we had, Keith Moon was drummer for The Who, Wild Man.
I mean, in terms of like how they're playing, like that.
How they played and how they lived. I was just in general. Yeah, and Led Zeppelin is just starting right around the time this album came out. John Bonham, wild player, wild man.
Animal, Muppets.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's kind of the stereotype for drummers. Charlie's not like that at all. How was that? How was that to be in that environment, to be in that milieu? Can I use a word like milieu? Is that
milieu?
No,
milieu.
Milieu, yeah.
A milieu to the.
We
to New York.
We can etude the milieu.
A milieu to
the
post office.
We can cesser. No, we can exit. But no, we can. What was it like to be, really different from a lot of the drummers at the time? Now, interestingly enough, you think another drummer that was very prominent this time, Ringo Starr, a little more wild than Charlie, but not a Keith Moon, John Bonham level. Pretty sedate still, and it kind of went with the Beatles, I guess. Then none of them were, I guess, as wild, at least publicly, as maybe some of these other groups. The Who certainly strikes me as, they had a lot of wildness in them, but
they didn't have to be. Like the Beatles, were first, so it's like it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we're talking about Angus Young, they had to come up with they thought about what is our catch, what's our thing we do to get people get noticed. And so at one point they all show up in different outfits, and then it's just, okay, we're all going to wear jeans except for Angus, and that becomes their thing. Mm-hmm. And so that gets them noticed. Like the Beatles probably didn't have to go through that, right? Because they were like, they get noticed.
They're the Beatles.
They're the
right?
Beatles.
So,
But then you're after the Beatles, then you probably have to, then everyone's thinking, okay, what can we do to distinguish?
How are you different from the Beatles, right?
Yeah, and they even talk about, there's that interview where he talks about how people kept confusing them with the Beatles, because everyone was like, oh, you're from Liverpool. Oh, and they have to keep saying, I was like, no, we're not.
No, from Liverpool.
Yeah, right. And so the United Kingdom is not one.
Right.
It's not like one
It's
city.
like one town. Yeah, no, we're not all from the same neighborhood.
We have multiple cities and places with different personalities within the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
We're not all from London. We're not all from Liverpool.
Mm-hmm.
And so so the gist of it was they had to do, when this album came out, they had to push back and say, look, we're different from the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that maybe that's why. So not only we ask the question, but we answer it. Charlie's not even here, and we ask and answer.
No. So what's the question?
Well, the question is, The question is, wait, it's got to do with him being calm and when.
What was it like being calm?
Yeah.
A calm drummer.
Really, in an era where rock drummers were wild men. I mean,
Right. And I was just
Keith Moon. I mean, that's kind of the standard for the wild man drummer. But wow, he was really light years different, and yet great drummer. You look at these studies, these polls and everything. Charlie Watts ranks right in there with Keith Moon. Keith Moon was a great drummer too, of course, but ranks right in there. It's not like the Wild Man was a better drummer. Maybe some would say maybe a little better, but Charlie right in there with him.
Well, and because I don't think I answered your question. I was just
no. I think you answered it.
No,
I think you did a great job.
That was not the answer because
that was actually a compliment. I was saying nice things that you.
Because I think all I was
thought,
what I was referencing was that they had to push back against bands had to come up with a thing, and so maybe having a wild drummer might be a band's thing.
Right. Yeah.
Where we're actually the guy like Angus Young and some of these guys and when you look at them off stage they're very calm, but on stage they put on a show for the audience. But I think it's a good question in that. Is Charlie great in the same way that Ray Manzarek is great because of their calmness? Because they can be calm in the middle of a storm. There's craziness going on around them, and because they're so solid and grounded, they allow these other artists to be kind of they can go further with their craziness because they maintain this grounding on it. And what's that like for Charlie? Was there times when he was like, man, I really want to riff, I really want to go off on a jazz tangent on this, but he knows if I do that, then the other 14 members aren't going to be.
They won't know where to go, and I'm sure he did want to go off on jazz because he really enjoyed jazz a lot.
Yeah, and so what was that like for him? Because I can see the internal struggle, especially if you're playing tour date after tour date after tour date. Yeah. And you have this, you're an artist too, and you want to be super creative. What happens when you're like, no, I am the straight man. I can't do the crazy part, but you want to do you want to do the crazy part. So what, how do you release some steam to do that?
Yeah, did you object to being identified with those crazy man drummers, or did you secretly want to be a crazy man drummer but just thought I can't pull it off? I'm not Keith Moon. He can do this. I can't do this.
And you could see Shirley maybe commenting on that.
Shirley would say, no, you're not doing that.
It's like, that's not the man I married. No. That would be all. I think it's a great question because the whole idea about him being grounded, but maybe he has this internal struggle going on inside him where he's like, I want to do these jazz riffs and whatnot. Maybe that's why he creates the Charlie Watts big band, so he has this outlet to go do this kind of stuff. So now you're answering. Okay.
Well, there you go. I think I've asked and answered my own question.
No, well, I think it's just the overall question. Charlie Watts, does he have this internal struggle going on of being this, how crazy he wants to get versus being grounded, or does he have this grounded personality that exists?
Well, and I should say, as we're talking about Charlie Watts' internal struggle, I should just clarify that neither one of us are licensed psychiatrists or psychologists.
No.
So we really can't address any internal struggles that he might have. But.
No, but I've watched a lot of HBO films, and there's a whole series where they have people come in and sit on the couch and talk through their problems. So I feel like maybe I have had some training.
Well, and I used to park for a couple of years. I had an office where I would park behind a psychologist's office. And so I feel like I kind of absorbed.
I feel like you're making fun of my statement now that I learned something from HBO.
No, I've learned a lot from HBO. I've learned, where to sell drugs in Baltimore.
I think we need to go on to the next question.
Okay, right. Next question would be, I think, is yours, right?
Was that question? That was question 8. Yeah, question 9.
So you have 9 or?
Yep, I got 9. I got niner. I got question 9. I have question 9. So question 9. This talks about this album. And put that down. this talks about this album and the producer Jimmy Miller. I found this little tidbit of information. Jimmy Miller was a drummer, and there was this whole article written up about this, in particular, Rolling Stones, Beggars Banquet, being the album that really makes the Stones, brings the Stones out as who they are, because it felt like they were adrift, and then this album brings them back to the blues bass, and Miller is credited with a lot of that, with him being on producing this album. How was it for Charlie Watts now to have, I don't want to say boss, but you now have somebody you're working with that's also a drummer? Did you have a lot of ideas that weren't getting heard before, and now you bring this drummer on, and he's able to take what you're throwing down and pick it up, and okay, yeah, let's do what Charlie's saying, but is able to get the other band members on board, and he's on board, and he gets the engineers on board. So I have a question for Charlie on what was that relationship like when this new person showed up to produce this album, and did you find that, or was it hard? Because sometimes you're working with somebody that does something that has some of your experience, but now they're like, they think they know everything about what you do, and that becomes very frustrating for you. So I'd be curious to ask Charlie about having Miller on this album, and what that experience was like. Did he feel like, and did he influence it all? Was it in the background? Was he like, I got a guy and he's super brilliant, and by the way, he's a drummer, or what was the backstory on that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And this album, from however it came about, I mean, this album really, I think, does mark a real turn for the Rolling Stones, because their early work, heavily blues covers, a lot of British Invasion, kind of the harder rock side of British Invasion, maybe. They weren't the happy-go-lucky, Jerry and the Pacemaker sort of thing, but they were more the hard, like Yardbirds. They're a little edgier than the Yardbirds, I would say, probably too. But then they tried this whole psychedelic thing, tried to do their own Sgt. Pepper's with Her Satanic Majesty's Request. And kind of, it's not a horrible album, but I don't know, how should I put it, it's not a great one either. There are some moments in it that are okay, but it kind of didn't work for them, didn't work for their personalities.
Right.
This album is different from all those. It goes back a little bit to some of the blues, but it's very not British Invasion, very the blues related rock that they wrote, which is really most of the song, almost, although one of the songs in here is you can hear the blues influence, but it's going a different direction, and it's defining who they became for the next 20 years, whatever, and still are to some extent, although arguably their music turned again probably in late 80s, but let's not even deal with that. They had about 20 years where this was them.
Yeah.
And they produced arguably, I would say, their best work as a result of that. So yeah, no, it's a good question.
Yeah, so if Miller is like the guy that they're like, oh, okay, this guy was critical in bringing this about, it seems to be the whole drummer connection just really intrigues me of what was Charlie Watts' role in that, and how was that relationship with him, and did Charlie end up having more, does this even put more credit on him for the focus of the band in terms of having that vision of, okay, this is really what sounds good when we play, and having that sound. I don't know. That's my question. Of what was, because this, like you said, this was such a critical album in the Stones' legacy and turning point, and it ended up being the right move. What role did you play with, as you think about, hey, in 1968, what was my role with this guy, this guy Jimmy Miller that comes on?
Yeah. And being, the fact that he was a drummer might have helped, because I think drummers in general, maybe you can address it as being a drummer. I've never been a drummer, but drummers in general, to me, strike me as people that have a focus on, keeping it going, keeping things together, and then bringing it to a conclusion. They kind of, you know what I mean? They're like the drummer kind of like a coordinator, for want of a better word. They started off and say, okay, here's how we're starting, bump, 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 and then they get it started, and then they kind of bring it to a close. So that strikes me as probably pretty good training for a record producer.
Well, we're
kind of what you got to do.
We were kind of making fun of having like similar hobbies and how these people get together. It's sort of like going out and being able to go to the gym and you can get a lot more done at the gym talking to a coworker sometimes than you can in the actual office. Mm-hmm. And so having this other drummer, did that instant bond give them that conversation so that they could that things just happen because they could quickly communicate with each other. That maybe with other folks became more difficult.
Well, and I find bringing work into the gym is really the best when you can combine the two. I like to bring work to the gym, although sometimes I have a problem holding onto the laptop while I'm doing the reps. And then I also like to exercise at work, but sometimes I'm pushing off on the desk and it's really flimsy.
So I get a funny. So sometimes at the Pentagon there'd be a gym and you'd be in there, and your boss would be in there, and your boss would have just gotten done showering, but would have something for you to do. So now you're looking at your naked boss while they're, and you're like,
see, here we go. And
you're looking at your naked.
He's gonna say, "This is my problem."
You're looking at your naked boss, and you're talking about work, and you're not wanting to do this right now, and so it's like, man, I just want to lift, but I'm seeing parts of you that I don't. I didn't need to see.
Could you call my attention like some other time?
But everyone's so busy all the time. It's like they'll grab you as just like, hey, I need you to go work on this project for me. And you're like, okay, great. Man, did you have to dry off right now?
Right now.
Does that have to happen? So that yes. So that's what I guess that's what I was alluding to. Is like at the gym, sometimes you get things done. I was thinking more like if you're on the bench press and you have an idea. Mm-hmm. Sometimes our barriers are down. You don't have those antigens. You don't have those. Oh, I'm pushing back against everything. And sometimes when you're just like, when you're not resisting new ideas, then you get better communication going on. And so as a fellow drummer, sometimes you could maybe break down some walls where okay, you're more receptive to trying something new because you have this other thing in common with the person. That's what I was going at.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll go to question 10.
We'll go to question 10, where I'm not just out of the shower. Question 10, I think for our wrap-up question, for our final question, I'm going to kind of come out of asking specifics about the music, and if I was going to ask Charlie, I'd say, Charlie, you started out as a graphic artist, and you were apparently pretty good at it. What if when Mick and Keith had said, hey, we're forming this group, we'd like you to play drums, what if you'd said no? What do you think your life would look like now if you'd stayed a graphic artist?
That's always there's hypotheticals you can't get your mind around. There's like alternate universe. What's the
no
alternate?
Way to know,
that's like Rick and Morty. Like you're in the alternate universe of Charlie Watts, graphic designer.
And there's a Rick and Morty universe where he's like got his own graphic design shop and he prints T-shirts.
Well, maybe that's the universe where Ray Manzarek becomes the keyboardist.
He becomes the keyboardist for the Rolling Stones.
Because the keyboardist for the Rolling
and
Stones.
Ringo Starr becomes drummer for the.
Does he still? Is there still a Charlie Watts big band that comes about?
Yeah, well, while he's printing T-shirts, he's got to do something.
He's got to do something.
And he played drums.
I heard he actually did some of the album art for the.
He did, yeah. He used to do
the design sets.
And albums back then, they had, if there was a 2-record set, sometimes even a 1-record set, you'd open and would have an inside, and they'd all have sleeve. He did a lot of the interior art, the sleeve art, the cover art. Did a lot of that back in the day.
Yeah, and what this makes me think of is Steve Jobs, because Jobs was a fanatic about design.
Not a drummer, but
but he was a fanatic about design and aesthetics, and that's where when you think about Apple, you think about something that's simple to use, but usually when you look at it, you're like, that's just pleasant to look at. And Charlie Watts, I guess as you brought this up about graphic design, you think about being dressed well, and he's designing the sets. His mind is I guess that if I think about Jobs and you think about, I guess I connect that to Watts, it's what is aesthetically pleasing? What do we find? Like the golden ratio would be something he would know about, and in proportions. This is what's going to become. We don't know why this is aesthetically pleasing, but we innately find these things in nature to be these ratios to be aesthetically pleasing. And having somebody on the team, like obviously like a Jobs or somebody like Watts, that understands these like basic principles of what's aesthetically pleasing. Even for the lead singer, he could be like, okay, what you're wearing, okay, I don't know what you're doing there, but you need to make this change just so people can look at you. Yeah, just like, and so having somebody like that would be, especially if they're on the team that you're not paying, like to give you that kind of objective advice of, okay, this looks aesthetically pleasing. This in no universe looks good.
Yeah, I got to think that maybe he, looking at how he's dressed, he's won some best dressed awards. I mean,
yeah.
Looking at how he dresses, he probably did not pick all of Mick Jagger's outfits. I'm gonna guess.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't.
Probably did not.
So you might still, in this other universe where he doesn't play drums for the Stones, he still would be best dressed.
Yeah, you're wearing great suits.
You'd have the Charlie Watts reality TV show of what not to wear, or they go out and find people who can't get dressed themselves.
So it'd be like drummer eye for the bad dressing.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The drummer eye for
drummer eye.
That is a great new show. The drummers
coming soon to E. Right?
You put some drummers together, and they can help people pick out their outfits. Mm-hmm. I'm feeling something there, Steve.
Yeah, it's like your outfit's out of rhythm.
Yeah. We need a little more hi-hat going on with what you're wearing.
Yeah. I think there's something to that.
We need some bass going. You have just a teeny bit of bass. We need to amp the bass up in that outfit.
Or bass the amp.
Or we're gonna bass the amp.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, we just came up with the 10 ultimate questions to ask Charlie Watts. And so if you're live streaming, thanks for joining us. If you're on replay, leave us a comment in the comment section.
And if you are Charlie Watts, hey, we're really sorry. We're actually big fans of the Stones. We didn't mean any of this.
We would love.
It's all in fun.
We want you to answer these 10 ultimate questions.
Answer
the 10 ultimate Charlie Watts questions. Okay? Even if you think they're horrible questions, tell us what the right ultimate questions would be. Mm-hmm. Then, I think these would stand the test of time. These will be the 10 ultimate questions.
That in 55 years, people will say those really were the ultimate questions.
We will. We'll be in the Smithsonian There'll be the Rolling Stones section, and then we'll start off with us coming up with the 10 ultimate questions to ask Charlie Watts, and
I'll be stuffed probably, because in 55 years I would be powerfully.
Wouldn't that be cool though, to be stuffed in the Smithsonian? I will probably be
stuffed and standing.
Like, of all the places to be dead, it's like, oh, my body's going to the Smithsonian. I'm gonna be in front of the Stones.
I'm gonna be pointing to the Stones exhibit.
Yes.
Like forever.
I think that'd be. I think that's something to aspire to.
There are worse places to go, there really are. I don't know.
Yes, the ground is good, I guess, but I think Smithsonian is a step up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you like this and we didn't put you in the ground, subscribe and hit the like button. Bye, YouTube.
See you.